France in the late 1700s was a land of huge castles and big problems. The country was known for its grand architecture and beautiful landscapes, but beneath this veneer of opulence, there were deep-seated issues that were festering. The disparity between the rich and the poor was growing wider by the day, and the seeds of discontent were being sown among the common people. King Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette, lived fancy lives, but most people were very poor. The royal court at Versailles was a world of luxury and excess, where the king and queen hosted lavish parties and indulged in extravagant fashions. Meanwhile, the majority of the population struggled to make ends meet, living in abject poverty and facing daily hardships. France had lots of money and beautiful art, but many people were starving. The streets of Paris and other cities were filled with beggars and destitute families, while the countryside was dotted with struggling farmers who could barely feed their families. The contrast between the wealth of the aristocracy and the poverty of the common people was stark and glaring. Farmers, who were most of the people, paid heavy taxes, but the rich nobles and church leaders didn't pay any. The tax burden on the peasantry was crushing, with many farmers forced to give up a significant portion of their harvest to the state. In contrast, the nobility and the clergy enjoyed numerous privileges and exemptions, living off the labor of the common people without contributing their fair share. The rich folks in their big houses didn't seem to care about the poor. They lived in opulent mansions, surrounded by luxury and comfort, while the common people suffered. The aristocracy was largely indifferent to the plight of the lower classes, focusing instead on their own pleasures and pursuits. They spent tons of money and ignored everyone else, which made people angry and ready for a change. The extravagant lifestyle of the nobility was a constant source of resentment among the common people, who saw their own struggles and hardships as a direct result of the excesses of the rich. This growing anger and frustration set the stage for a dramatic upheaval. Smart thinkers of the time like Rousseau and Montesquieu said kings shouldn't have all the power and that people should have rights. These Enlightenment philosophers argued for the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, challenging the traditional hierarchies and advocating for a more just and equitable society. Their ideas inspired many and fueled the growing desire for change. France also had money problems from fighting wars like helping America become free. The financial strain of supporting the American Revolution along with other costly military campaigns had left the French treasury depleted. The government's mounting debt added to the economic woes of the country, exacerbating the already dire situation. The king needed money, so he tried to make people pay more taxes, but they refused. The common people, already burdened by heavy taxes, resisted further demands for money. Protests and uprisings became more frequent as the populace grew increasingly defiant and unwilling to accept the status quo. With no money left, the king had to call a big meeting, the Estates General. This assembly, which had not been convened for over a century, was seen as a last-ditch effort to address the financial crisis and quell the growing unrest. It brought together representatives from the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. It had representatives from the church, the nobles, and the common people. Each estate had its own interests and grievances, and the meeting was fraught with tension and conflict. The common people in particular saw this as an opportunity to voice their demands and push for meaningful reforms. This meeting in 1789 was a super important moment because the common people finally had a chance to speak up. For the first time, the voices of the ordinary citizens were heard in a formal setting, and their demands for change could no longer be ignored. This pivotal moment marked the beginning of a revolutionary movement that would forever alter the course of French history. The Estates General meeting in May 1789 was tense right away. The assembly, which hadn't been called for over 175 years, was a gathering of representatives from the three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the common people, also known as the Third Estate. The Third Estate, representing the vast majority of the French population, arrived with a sense of urgency and a long list of grievances. They were determined to address the deep economic and social inequalities that plagued France. The common people, who were most of France, came with a lot of complaints. They were burdened by heavy taxes, while the clergy and nobility enjoyed numerous privileges and exemptions. The harsh winter had led to poor harvests, causing food shortages and skyrocketing bread prices. The commoners were desperate for change and saw this meeting as a rare opportunity to voice their frustrations and demand reforms. They wanted votes to be counted by person, not by group, so they would have more power. The Third Estate argued that the traditional voting system, which gave each estate one vote, was unfair. This system allowed the clergy and nobility to outvote the commoners despite the Third Estate representing 98% of the population. They demanded a new voting system where each representative would have an individual vote, ensuring a more democratic and equitable process. But the church and nobles wanted to keep their power and said no. The clergy and nobility, who had long enjoyed their privileged status, were unwilling to relinquish their control. They feared that granting more power to the commoners would threaten their own positions and disrupt the established social order. This refusal to compromise only fueled the growing tensions between the estates. The common people were angry and inspired by those smart thinkers. Enlightenment ideas, which emphasized reason, equality, and individual rights, had been spreading throughout France. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu had challenged the traditional hierarchies and called for a society based on justice and equality. These ideas resonated deeply with the commoners, who saw them as a blueprint for a fairer and more just society. They decided to make their own group, the National Assembly, and said they were the real leaders of France. On June 17, 1789, the Third Estate took a bold step by declaring themselves the National Assembly. They asserted that they were the true representatives of the French people and had the authority to make decisions on their behalf. This act of defiance marked a significant turning point in the struggle for power and set the stage for the revolutionary events that would follow. This was the start of the French Revolution, a time of big changes that affected all of France and even other countries. The formation of the National Assembly was a catalyst for a series of dramatic events that would reshape the political landscape of France. The revolution challenged the absolute authority of the monarchy and sought to establish a government based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The impact of the French Revolution extended beyond France's borders, inspiring movements for change across Europe and the world. Locked out of their meeting room, the National Assembly met on a tennis court and made the famous tennis court oath. On June 20, 1789, after being barred from their usual meeting place, the members of the National Assembly gathered in a nearby indoor tennis court. There, they took a solemn oath not to disband until they had drafted a new constitution for France. This moment, known as the Tennis Court Oath, symbolized their unwavering commitment to their cause and their determination to bring about meaningful change. They promised to stay put until France had a constitution. The Tennis Court Oath was a powerful declaration of unity and resolve. The members of the National Assembly vowed to stand together and continue their efforts until they had succeeded in creating a new constitutional framework for France. This pledge galvanized their supporters and signaled a new phase in the revolutionary struggle. This made people excited, and everyone started protesting in the streets to support the National Assembly. The news of the Tennis Court Oath spread quickly, igniting a wave of enthusiasm and activism among the common people. Demonstrations and protests erupted across France as citizens rallied in support of the National Assembly's efforts to create a more just and equitable society. The streets were filled with passionate calls for change, and the momentum of the revolution continued to build. The king and queen were surprised by how fast things were changing and couldn't stop it. King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette were taken aback by the rapid pace of events. They had underestimated the depth of the common people's discontent and the influence of revolutionary ideas. Despite their attempts to maintain control, the tide of change was unstoppable. The French Revolution had begun, and it would forever alter the course of history. Things got worse in Paris and rumors spread fast. People whispered that the king was bringing soldiers to stop the revolution. Everyone was scared and angry at the king. On July 14, 1789, a very important day, angry people attacked the Bastille, a big scary prison. The Bastille was a symbol of the king's power, and when the people took it over, it was a huge victory. It showed that even regular people could fight back. The Bastille falling was a big moment in the revolution. It made the revolutionaries brave and shocked everyone in France and other countries. It was like a volcano erupting, and it showed that the king wasn't as powerful as everyone thought. Section 4. Terror and Triumph, the Revolution's Bloody Path. The French Revolution started with hope, but then things got very violent. It was like a ship in a storm, tossed around by fighting inside France and threats from other countries. Radical groups, led by Maximilien Robespierre, took over and started executing lots of people, even some of the revolution's first leaders. The guillotine, a scary machine for chopping off heads, killed thousands. This time, called the Reign of Terror, was full of fear and bloodshed. A group called the Committee of Public Safety had all the power and could kill anyone they wanted. The terror stopped people from disagreeing with the government, but it also killed many of its own supporters. Finally, Robespierre himself was executed in 1794, ending the worst of the violence. The revolution calmed down a bit after that. Even with all the bad things, the revolution changed France forever. Section 5. Napoleon's rise from soldier to emperor. After all the fighting and confusion, a new leader came to power, Napoleon Bonaparte. Born on the island of Corsica in 1769, Napoleon quickly rose through the military ranks during the French Revolution. His early career was marked by a series of rapid promotions, thanks to his keen strategic mind and fearless leadership on the battlefield. Napoleon was a great general and very ambitious. His military prowess was evident in his campaigns in Italy and Egypt, where he demonstrated his ability to outmaneuver and outthink his opponents. His victories made him a national hero in France, and his ambition knew no bounds. He became powerful when France was fighting other countries. The French Revolution had left the country in turmoil, and Napoleon seized the opportunity to rise to power. His leadership during the tumultuous times of the Revolutionary Wars solidified his reputation as a formidable military leader. He saw that the government after the Reign of Terror wasn't very strong, so he took over in 1799 and made himself the leader of France. This event, known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire, marked the end of the French Revolution and the beginning of Napoleon's rule. He established the consulate, with himself as first consul, effectively becoming the most powerful man in France. Napoleon was good at making himself look good, and he said he was saving the revolution and would bring peace to France. He used propaganda effectively to shape public opinion and present himself as the savior of France. His promises of stability and order resonated with a population weary of years of chaos and bloodshed. He made the government stronger and started making big changes. Napoleon implemented a series of reforms that transformed French society. He centralized the administration, reformed the legal system with the Napoleonic Code, and improved education. These changes helped to stabilize France and consolidate his power. Napoleon's rise to power ended the French Revolution and started a new time, the Napoleonic era. This era was characterized by a series of military campaigns across Europe, as Napoleon sought to expand his empire and spread the ideals of the revolution. Napoleon had lots of energy and wanted more power. His relentless drive and ambition led him to pursue ever greater conquests. He was not content with merely ruling France, he wanted to dominate Europe. He conquered many countries in Europe, fighting Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Great Britain. His military campaigns were marked by brilliant tactics and decisive victories, but also by immense human suffering and destruction. He changed the map of Europe, and even though he spread some of the revolution's ideas, he also made people in other countries want to fight back against him, which would eventually lead to his defeat. The resistance he faced from other nations, combined with his own overreaching ambition, ultimately led to his downfall. Despite his initial successes, the tide turned against him, culminating in his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815.